Welcome to Underdubs, a podcast about 70s progressive rock and more. This podcast is a conversational music variety show with a focus on the classic progressive rock artists of the 1970s and how their music has shaped culture, technology, and the music of today. We'll, of course, cover the classic prog bands like Yes and Genesis, but also other forms like the Canterbury scene, neo-prog, proto-prog, and fusion, and all points in between. Your hosts, Brian Donahue and Pat Strauser, are two of the founding members of the instrumental progressive rock fusion band Volare, based in Athens, Georgia, from the mid-1990s. In this episode, we talk about live progressive rock albums, our favorite live albums, and our not-so-favorite live albums. Be sure to check out the links that we provide in the notes for playlists and other content that we discuss here. We hope you enjoy the show. What's in the 8-track player, Brian? What is what is on your cassette deck? Favorite progressive rock live albums. What have you got for me?
Well, there's several, right? So if we're talking about common prog, the big
prog.
six, the big five, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
there's quite a few to choose from. I think
True.
the main ones, when I think prog live albums, I'm thinking of Genesis, I'm thinking of Yes, I'm thinking of ELP. They all had big landmark live albums. A lot of those are doubles or triples, right?
True.
And then there's some maybe more obscure ones, or some ones that I know there's one on your list that I peeked at that was not released as a music album, but was released as a film.
True.
That one's near and dear to my heart as well. So I was happy to see that one on your list. But when I think of 70s prog live albums, I think of Yes. Instantly, right? Yes Songs, which is a mammoth. It's a triple vinyl set, right? Is it 3 records or 2? I don't remember.
It's 3 records. That's true.
3 records. That's right. You know, 900 gatefolds of the vinyl as it pulls out. It's a really impressive package.
Mm-hmm.
The set list, is stellar, as you might imagine.
It is.
My issues with it, though, are I don't like it very much. I love the band. I love the players. I love the songs. I love the packaging, everything. But I think it sounds muddy. And I think in their zeal to present the new band with new drummer Alan White, they kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater, because evidently they had some great Bruford era stuff, because there is a little bit of Bruford on that record. I think it's on Perpetual Change, if I remember correctly.
I think you were right.
And
yes.
Maybe something else.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like the Alan White version of Yes, but the bombast of some of those early tours to me is coupled with the kind of murkiness of the recording. I don't really love the live album, and I like the movie, the Yes Songs video.
Yeah.
Which I have on DVD these days. I haven't watched it in a while, but back in the day when I was a teenager, I used to rent it from Blockbuster on VHS and watch it.
Yeah.
And I love that movie. But without the visuals, without the idea that like this is a concert that you're watching, I don't love Yes Songs.
Yeah, I'm with you. I bought it very early on in my progressive rock journey. I would say I was probably about 17. And I can't remember what all I had gotten at that point. I think I'd gotten, all the big, Close to the Edge and all the rest of it, And I was so excited to get a hold of that album. I got it on CD, used at a used record store. And even then, I was not impressed with the sound quality primarily. I mean, the performance is great, but it just has all of the telltale signs of poor audio recording technology to me. As it happens, I did give it another listen almost in its entirety about 2 months ago. My oldest son, who is a budding progressive rock nerd and huge Yes fan, purchased it at a local record store, and we sat down and we listened to, I think, at least the first 2 discs. And let's just say I liked it more than I used to. But you could say that would be giving them a little more latitude after having... It's a little bit like when you're a kid, you like to criticize your parents because they don't know what they're doing. But then by the time you're a parent, you're like, oh, well, they had some stuff up against them. It was a little bit like that. Like, well, it's hard recording a rock and roll band live, especially in 1972, so
that's,
whatever.
You're right. That's what I always think about is like the first Genesis live album from 73, which we'll talk about shortly, I'm sure. To me, I love the sound of it. They're playing in a manageable sized room, like a theater or an auditorium or something. And it sounds like a live band on a stage, and it sounds great. I love it. Yes Songs, due to their popularity, they were probably playing some larger and larger and larger venues, and the whole thing was just snowballing. I cannot imagine the chaos of being on that stage, maybe being Alan White in 1972 or 73 or even 74, and having to deal with the playback, the monitoring issues and stuff. And so sometimes when I hear some of the Yes stuff and the tempo is just out of control and they're just like flying downhill, I think, well, they probably couldn't hear each other. So they're like, each one is kind of raising the tempo to try to catch up. I've been in that situation, so it's not knocking them to say they weren't an amazing band, but you're right. They had a lot. The cards were stacked against them to release maybe an overly ambitious triple live album in 1972.
Right. That is a good way of putting it.
But I think that's another theme where you've got a double or triple live album and you end up filling it with more material from varied years than really you're necessarily presenting. I mean, if you read the liner notes, it probably says, but I'm thinking now of Genesis on Seconds Out. Everything else was recorded on the 77 tour, the Wind and Wuthering tour, but they put in the one track from Bill Bruford the previous year.
Oh, right. Cinema Show.
I guess that's a theme when you need to fill 4 sides of vinyl and you want your best, and I guess you do what you got to do, whether it's historically accurate or not. It's not so much a souvenir of the tour, but it was their livelihood, I guess. So they wanted to put as much out as they could.
Right. Yeah, it's a good way of looking at it. What other records on your list?
Well, how about Yes Shows?
Ooh.
Did you ever hear Yes Shows?
It's been a minute since I've heard it, but yeah.
So that one is definitely a compilation, again, of different lineups of Yes in the 70s. And it was released, I think, after the band had dissolved in like 79, 80, somewhere around there. And Chris Squire cobbled it together. And I think it's great. I enjoy it more than Yes Songs. On paper, the set list is maybe weaker, but I really like Yes Shows. Maybe because I'm a big Relayer fan, so it's got a big, long Gates of Delirium that's pretty smoking.
Right.
But again, like hurtling through Gates of Delirium, and you're like, where's the one? I don't think they agree on where the one is, but somehow it works. I listened to it not too long ago, and Steve Howe is just shredding. But it occurred to me that like he's like 2/8 notes ahead of the other guys. Everybody's just like. And it almost doesn't matter for that one composition anyway. It's, so chaotic by nature.
Right.
So if you can forgive those things, I think Yes Shows is superior to Yes Songs.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It had and to your point, it is more of a compilation, like a live best of type of thing almost, because they do, Time on the Word is on there. So it's going way back. Yeah. They do parts of Tales, so it's, So they cover a lot more ground. I mean, obviously they've been around, a lot longer at that point. It was released in 1980, I think. So
I think so, yeah.
So they were a well-oiled machine at this point. Yeah, that's a good record. I haven't paid a whole lot of attention to it. I could probably count on one hand the number of times I've listened to it in its entirety. What other ones you got?
Well, another huge one for me as a young listener was, going to take a deep breath before you say the title. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, ladies and gentlemen. Emerson, Lake and Palmer, which I think I did have it on 8-track, now that you mention it. But I also had it on cassette. I don't know if I ever bought the vinyl, but I had it on cassette and 8-track.
Nice.
And I loved it. It was great. And again, some spots are maybe a little less than perfectly accurate, and some spots are really, especially with Carl Palmer in the band, you're really racing downhill at breakneck speed.
Right.
Often, even when you don't expect to, he's going to say, here we go. I'm speeding it up. But that being said, I love it. Sonically, I think it's better than Yes songs. Mm-hmm. It's still, is recorded, 73, something like that?
Recorded in 74.
74, okay. And
Anaheim Convention Center.
But I love it. And I love the set list because it's so, it leans heavily on brain salad surgery. Mm-hmm. And I think it's great. It's amazing throughout the 70s. Yes, and ELP in particular were playing this crazy, complicated music. Think of Carnival 9 or Gates of Delirium or whatever, mm-hmm. to these enormous North American stadium audiences.
Right. Yeah.
Tens of thousands of people lining up all day to hear them play, excerpts from Benny the Bouncer or whatever. And but I think Welcome Back is a really good live album. And I guess in that case really was more of a souvenir of the concert.
Yeah, I haven't listened to that one in quite some time. I didn't particularly, the more I think about it, I didn't particularly like live albums as much because there was a part of me that wanted it to sound like the record. I wanted it to sound, so if there was something sonically, misaligned, then, I think that's why Yes songs are such a letdown. Although I will say, listening to Welcome Back, which again, it's been years. I mean, it's so impressive to hear them pull that off.
But there's some other ELP live stuff from the 70s, right? Mm-hmm. There's Pictures at an Exhibition, which is live.
That's right.
And I didn't even hear that one until well into me being into ELP. Mm-hmm. But I really like that rendition of the song.
Yeah.
Which of course is a cover song, I guess you'd call it. A modified cover song right. With lyrics and vocals added.
Right.
And then there's even some late 70s live stuff by ELP, but I can't remember how much of that was released at the time. Do you remember?
Well, there's one called In Concert?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. And now we have something called Works Live, I think, which is, I think, an expanded In Concert.
In Concert was 1977 in Montreal.
Yeah.
And I think it had, what did it have?
Had Peter Gunn on it.
Yeah. Yeah, that one didn't blow me away either. Gosh, 70-piece orchestra on... I just can't imagine touring with a 70-piece orchestra. That's insane.
Well, I think they ran out of money with the 70-piece orchestra and had to send them home. But there's video and audio, obviously, of it working. I'm not a huge fan of orchestra with rock band.
Yeah.
But, I guess if you're playing Montreal Olympic Stadium in 1977 or whatever, 77, 78, whatever year it was.
Right.
You got to come up with something, to make it seem worth their while. So it makes sense that if anybody was going to try it, it would be ELP.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm with you that, to me, that ELP live stuff, for one thing, Greg Lake's alembic bass recording on that is really thin sounding. It's not fad at all. And I've read different accounts of like, well, he had two outputs, like a stereo output from that bass guitar, and it didn't get recorded properly or whatever. But
Right.
you just end up with kind of no bottom end or not much bottom end. There is, however, an unofficial, I mean, maybe it's been officially released by now by ELP, but there's a Wheeling, West Virginia bootleg of that tour. I'm pretty sure it's without the orchestra. Maybe it's with, I don't remember. And it's really good. It's really well recorded, and they're on fire, and it sounds great. Worth checking out.
You know, it should be mentioned too that a lot of the records that we're talking about are sort of part of progressive rock canon. Yes Songs and Welcome Back, Seconds Out, Genesis Live, some of that stuff, all progressive rock fans of a particular age, that was just a part of the discography, right? Rush, Exit Stage Left, stuff like that. Song Remains the Same, etc. Those records were just, you got it along with the rest of the stack of stuff, and everything else was just sort of, you know, oh, I got this live bootleg from '78. Well, you got that at the record store, or you got that at the record show, or through mail order, or something like that. You were in some kind of fan club, and that's how you got that. Of course, that scarcity doesn't exist anymore, right? So you can get like a whole body of live recordings from any given band of any given period, almost all of it for free on YouTube or whatever, which is great. But it's also like that means there's just so much stuff that I've never heard any of it. You know, I'm like, oh, okay. This morning I was looking up Weather Report Live, and it just the amount of stuff, and it all sounds amazing, right? It's not like, oh, well, it's you know, someone recorded it on a you know, like, you know, tape recorder in the back or something like that. It's just everything sounds fantastic. It's just and you know, that I think that bears mentioning, that like the scarcity issue isn't at play.
Well, I guess back in the 70s the labels were the gatekeepers. You know, I could think of a couple examples where the bands didn't necessarily want these live albums to come out. I know Genesis Live was recorded for a radio show, and they did not want it to be released, or the band didn't want it to come out. And the record label was like, no, we're doing this. It's going to be a budget priced thing. You'll see, it's going to work out great. And I agree. I think it was a good move.
Right.
But supposedly, Yes Shows that we were just talking about has a sordid history of Chris Squire putting it together when the band was on hiatus, and then submitting a rough mix to the record label, or so the story goes. This could have maybe just been him covering his ass years later, but and then the band saying, no, it's we need to remix it, it's too rough, and the label saying, you know, oh, we're going to put it out anyway, this is exactly what we need. So you get some gatekeepers, but you also get some probably infuriating business decisions when you're the band member and they get to decide what's coming out.
All right, so Yes Shows, Welcome Back. What else you got for us?
There's the two Genesis records which we've kind of danced around. Genesis Live from '73, which I believe was recorded on two different nights in early '73. So before the Selling England material, it's Foxtrot and Nursery Crime and Trespass material. And to me, that's just, for one thing, it's my favorite Genesis record of all time out of their entire discography. And also, as far as live albums, it's my favorite live album because it sounds fantastic. It sounds like you're on the stage with Genesis at that time, before they got so big that, you know, the rooms got bigger, the amplification and the monitoring and everything became a much bigger deal. Contrast that with Seconds Out, the 1977 Genesis Live double album, where I love the set list, but a lot of that, with the exception of the stuff recorded with Bruford on the 76 tour, the 77 material to me sounds like a completely different way of presenting the music, more in line with what Yes was forced to do because the rooms were bigger and the amplification was bigger.
Yeah.
And it just sounds like a way less intimate experience listening to Seconds Out versus Genesis Live. It really sounds like you're in, maybe not the cheap seats, but you're back a little ways. You know, it doesn't have the same kind of power, same kind of kick. But then on, you know, side 3 or side 4 or whatever it is with Cinema Show, recorded in 76, to me, that's a much more present recording, I assume, in a smaller venue on a smaller stage. The album design, like the sleeve packaging and the artwork for Seconds Out, I think is amazing. I just love it. It's like this a lot of pictures of the band on stage at that time, and they really do a good job of presenting, you know, the best of what the live experience would have been like for the audience. I mean, really well done. And in the shots, you could see how big the production had gotten, how large the stages were, how far from the stage the audience was seated. Even on the remixes of the Genesis stuff that came out, 2007, 2008 or so, there's a completely remixed version of Seconds Out, and I was pretty excited about that. But even that just kind of doesn't really have the balls that it needs, that I bet it had if you were in the room.
Yeah.
But you know, when Mike Rutherford stomps on the bass pedals, I want it to hit me in the chest. And you know, Seconds Out is a little tepid for the most part for me. Love the packaging, love the set list, love the band, but none of those are my go-to versions, with the exception of Cinema Show.
I am actually almost on the other side of the coin from you on those two records. Genesis Live, while I admit I probably need to revisit it, never quite captured me like Seconds Out. And that could be very well because of when I encountered it on my, you know, musical listening journey. Well, for me, I think it has a lot to do with just my affinity for the material that they're covering. I just like the material on Seconds Out better than the earlier Trespass and Nursery Crime. I mean, I love Nursery Crime and Foxtrot. I love those records. I love Selling England. But they didn't really start featuring synthesizers, I think, until, I want to say, Selling England by the Pound is when the first synthesizer, like an ARP Pro Soloist, I think is what he's using on Cinema Show and all that. By the time Seconds Out came out, and they cover stuff from earlier Gabriel period stuff, Supper's Ready, of course. I just loved it. I just loved the sound of that record. And I think it might have also been a thing where I just happened to listen to it a lot. I was in school at the time, and I would carry around a backpack with like a big stack of tapes that I would grab out of my car. And I'd made a tape copy of Seconds Out and, you know, all these other records, you know, a bunch of King Crimson and Yes, and all of it, Mahavishnu, all that stuff. And so Seconds Out, I had it on one big 90-minute tape. I was able to fit the whole thing. And I walked around campus listening to that constantly. So if I had Genesis Live on tape, that might have found its way into circulation more. Because I love The Knife and I love Watcher of the Skies. I love the tunes on there, but it's still, like, for me, I just ended up gravitating towards that other material a lot more. Oh, well, the other thing was, it's interesting, you talk about like the intimacy of the recording, and I actually did not like that at the time. Because I kind of noticed that. I was like, it almost reminded me of Yes songs a bit. But I'd be willing to bet if I listen back to it now, because it's been years since I've listened to Genesis. I'll bet it's been, if I listened to it 10 years ago, within the last 10 years, I would be highly surprised.
Well, I know some people that think the Seconds Out version of Supper's Ready is the gold standard best version. I understand where they're coming from because there's some weird issues with the studio version, like some weird tuning stuff at the end, pitch differences.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, so I understand you get a more seamless presentation and it's desirable. And it's a good version for sure, especially the Apocalypse and 9/8 part. It's not my go-to version, but I get it. I understand. It's a little pristine. Right. It's a little, that whole record is a little distant and manicured. And I personally like the blood and guts splashed all over the stage in the 1973 live rendition,
Well, you got any not so favorite live records other than Yes songs?
I don't like, and this is bordering on Prog. I think we can agree this is Prog adjacent or Prog important, but not necessarily Prog, is Led Zeppelin's The Song Remains the Same. Yeah. And I got that record on vinyl with great anticipation because I love Led Zeppelin. I did when I was a teenager. I still love Led Zeppelin. In fact, I probably listened to Led Zeppelin more often than some of the Prog stuff that we have been discussing on this podcast, to be honest.
Right.
But to me, Zeppelin was a band that, man, just hire one more guy, hire an extra guy on stage. Just hire a guy who can play some keys and play some rhythm guitar, and it would make a huge difference. So some of the Zeppelin stuff, like No Quarter, I think is tremendous. Sounds great.
Right, yeah.
A lot of what's on that record, though, you've got Jimmy Page trying to do everything that he did on the studio recordings, a lot of guitar layers, a lot of overdubs, and it just doesn't work for me. I end up just thinking about what's missing, and I love John Bonham more than most things in life, but I do not need to hear a 97-minute drum solo. Sorry. So that's a skippable moment for me too. Apart from like that super early Led Zeppelin live stuff where they're playing bluesy stuff. I mean, there's some great video on the How the West Was Won DVD set of like 1969, I think, or 1970, somewhere around there. And it's mostly relying on pretty simple forms, blues rock, extended blues rock.
Yeah.
Progged up blues rock. Yeah. That stuff sounds killer. They were great. But when it came to replicating some of the studio stuff a few years later, it falls short for me. I don't get too excited about it. And that's one I have not intentionally heard even 1 minute of The Song Remains the Same live album since I was a teenager. It just pissed me off.
Yeah, my familiarity with really any of these live albums kind of starts when I'm in high school and I'm 16, and a friend of mine, I guess he had done all that, and he was selling off a bunch of old tapes, and he sold me, I think I was 16, and he sold me Delicate Sound of Thunder by Pink Floyd from, I think it's 1987 or 88. And then he sold me Song Remains the Same on tape. Like they were these double cassette. And I was just getting into this stuff. And I really liked Delicate Sound of Thunder. In fact, that one's on my list. It's a good recording. And they play a bunch of good tunes. Sounds great. Well, and then, and then I listened to Song Remains the Same, and I'm like, this isn't very good. And I seem to remember seeing the movie probably around the same time. I think they played it at MTV or something like that. And the movie was just, I didn't know what is this? It was hilarious. John Bonham driving around and dressed as a knight and all this kind of stuff, race cars. It was ridiculous, I thought. I loved Led Zeppelin, right? I loved the studio recordings, but that live album it started a thing with me where I'm like, just because you like the band doesn't mean you're going to like the live album. So, but to continue with my list, so one that I started out on early was Rush Exit Stage Left from, I think it's 81 or something. So I guess it's the Moving Pictures tour. And that was another one I got right at the same time as those other things. And I was just getting into this stuff, and I loved that album because it was a little bit like a, like a greatest hits.
I think that was a
you know what I mean?
a budget-friendly way to get into a band for the first time is you get the double live album, or God forbid the triple live album, and you've got supposedly their greatest hits right there. So even I had that Rush record, although mysteriously I only had half of it. I bought it at a used record shop. I got home, and like I should have checked both pockets, but only one record was in there.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I think my parents got it for me for Christmas when I was 16, and around the same time, and I'm just a budding music fan, and I'd been taking piano lessons for many years and didn't really enjoy it, but I had gotten a hold of a book of Rush sheet music. Had the guy standing there, the naked dude with the star.
Yeah, like, hey, Mom, buy me that.
I remember right. Are you listening to devil music now? My piano teacher was aghast. I brought that in. I want to learn Xanadu. And I bring this, and she's, oh my God, clutching her pearls. She wasn't having it. Anyway, it was cool because almost all of those tunes on Exit Stage Left were in that book. So that's kind of how I started learning to play. In fact, I remember like on the tune Xanadu, there's this kind of long, this Taurus bass pedal drone and this, this real spacey, volume pedal swell guitar lines. And that wasn't in the sheet music. So I actually transcribed it. I'm 16 and I'm trying to write out the note. I probably didn't transcribe it properly, but I learned it by listening. I guess I had my tape player sitting next to the piano and I just sat there and plunked it out.
That's awesome.
And wrote it down on a sheet of paper. And then I learned the rest of the song, the da 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 da. So that record was sort of where I cut my teeth, because there's also it should be mentioned that was right when Rush was getting chin deep into synthesizers. Geddy Lee had his infamous Obermoog rig. I don't know if you've seen.
I knew he had an Ober
monstrosity. So he toured with this custom built. I think it was either an Oberheim 4-voice or 8-voice, the white faced SEM unit. But what he had done is he had gotten a mini Moog panel, and I guess his tech or somebody built this thing. It was 1 part mini Moog and 1 part Oberheim 4-voice or 8-voice. This is this massive thing. It had foot pedals. It was a custom built thing, but you can see in some tour footage from around 1979, 80, you can see him. It's kind of off to the side on the stage where he'll have like a mic set up so he can sing, play bass and keyboard stuff, and then go out front, whatever. That was an introduction to me of keyboards in, if you like Led Zeppelin, you don't like Led Zeppelin because of the piano parts, But there was I became such a big Rush fan that I started really paying attention. Oh, what is that? It's an Oberheim OB1. What is that? Where does that happen in the song? Or an OBXA or a Mini Moog or whatever. There's the laundry list of synths that they started using. And so that album was a point of entry for me with that, especially since I was learning.
That's cool.
The songs in the sheet in the book. So Exit Stage Left, big deal. And then later on, I would say another great big one for me would have been, we talked about Seconds Out. I got into that. I was in college. I loved that record. Right around that same time, I think the Great Deceiver, the King Crimson Great Deceiver box set came out, and that was just unnervingly good. So I really loved that record. Well, I guess it was a box set, right? It was 4 or 5 CDs.
But remember, King Crimson had a few contemporaneous live albums, if that's the right word,
right?
In the 70s. They had Earthbound, which is terrible.
I don't know that one.
Recorded on the Islands tour, and I think not necessarily released in the U.S. at the time, but I've got it on vinyl, and not a fan, really. And then they already had a live album from the Great Deceiver era. It was called USA.
USA, yeah. That's great.
Which
record.
I had on cassette even before the Great Deceiver came out, and I wore that tape out. I loved it. Turns out it had some, like many of these we're talking about, some doctored moments. I think there's even an allegation that Eddie Jobson had gone in and flown in some violin parts on top of the existing David Cross stuff.
Interesting.
Maybe for technical reasons. I don't know. Yeah. So USA, I love, and Great Deceiver, you're right. It's just absolutely mind blowing.
Yeah. That stuff in the prog realm, those were the standout live albums that really just sort of like hit me in the chest. A couple of other like honorable mentions for me is right around 1995. Our good friend Daniel got me hooked on to the Pat Metheny group, and he introduced me to a live album from 81 or 82 called Travels. It's a double disc record, and so it covers all that early period ECM stuff. It was an ECM release. They do As Falls Wichita Falls and San Lorenzo Phase Dance, some of that stuff, and that got me hooked on all of the Metheny material. He did another one in 93 called The Road to You, which I really, really loved. That's a sort of a departure from the prog world. That's more almost Weather Channel type stuff. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, by the way. So, so those were big impact records. A couple other ones. I loved Peter Gabriel's Secret World Live from 94. That album I thought was
I saw that tour, and I saw the tour movie, which was cool, but I don't think I ever heard the album.
I thought it was a masterpiece, and I still kind of do. For a long time, it was one of the few albums that, remember when before streaming came online, there was Napster, and there was just this sort of ability to just download stuff somewhere. And for a long time, that was the only album that I bought. And I'm like, I'm paying money for this album because it's that good. I just loved that album. Weather Report 830 is another one that I just love. So I think it's from 79 or 80. It's Peter Erskine. It's just a 4-piece, I think. Jaco. So those are my picks.
So another live album that was crucial for me was Playing the Fool by Gentle Giant. It was my first Gentle Giant album, and it took me a while to digest it. At first, I only liked one song. I liked On Reflection. I liked hearing the strings, the cello and the violin and the vibraphone and the marimba and all that kind of stuff. And then slowly I got more into the rest of the record. And then eventually from there became a huge Gentle Giant fan shortly thereafter. So I got to throw Playing the Fool into my mentions because it was just huge for me. I don't love the sound of it. I think it's not a greatly recorded or engineered live album. And I even realized that at the time, which I think is one thing that had me kind of keep it at arm's length. But just such a great band. That was a huge one for me. And another one that I think we alluded to before is it wasn't really a live album per se, but a movie. And that was Pink Floyd Live at Pompeii, which is probably my all-time favorite concert movie. And I'm not the greatest Pink Floyd fan in the world. I kind of lose interest right around Dark Side of the Moon, although I love Animals from 77. But they kind of lose me when they get incredibly successful. I think I could probably say that about a lot of bands. But so the Live at Pompeii to me captures like the very, very best set list, the very, very best era of that band. And it's just such a great iconic film. And I think there's on one of their box sets, an audio version of that concert. I've heard that's the case. But years ago I ripped the DVD or the VHS onto a CD just because I loved it so much. So for me, Live at Pompeii is another hugely important live. Can't quite call it an album, but we're going to call it an album for this.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because that was on my list as well. And it's funny. You were talking about seeing Yes songs at Blockbuster Video. I used to see Live at Pompeii at the video store, and I was always perplexed about it because I don't know how you were, but at a certain age, I remember thinking, oh, well, if there's a live version video, there must be a companion record that was released with it, like the audio only version. And I never saw Live at Pompeii at Turtles Record and Tapes or wherever. And I was, as a teenager, I was just always like, I wonder why that is.
So that's another VHS I used to rent from the Blockbuster. Probably the same one. I think it was between my house and your house, but it was before we knew each other.
Oh yeah, right there on
I think so,
Gaines School Road in Cedar Shoals. Yep. Oh my gosh, wow, like two ships that pass in the night. Thanks for joining us again on this episode of Underdubs. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. See you next time.